think the last time I was here, I had mentioned that in all my 58 years on earth, I never recall the world being so noisy than it was at that time. And that was right in the throes and right in the midst of civil unrest in our city, but in cities across the country. So there was a lot of shouting, a lot of noise, a lot of accusations, us versus them, a lot of signs, a lot of placards. Then it got noisy with the destruction of property. Then, of course, the noisiest was social media. Again, all from the turmoil that was happening in our city and cities throughout the U.S. And up until that time, we were living in kind of this hushed silence because we were in lockdown. And we were separated from our loved ones and from our coworkers and from neighbors and from friends and from each other. And so when we are living that way, we don't have much to talk about. We're natural storytellers. So when you're not in communion, you're not in relationship with others, you're not seeing people, those things that we typically would talk about and that are easy for us to talk about, we were not able to talk about because we weren't interacting with anyone. We couldn't even really talk about Nebraska football because we were afraid there may not be Nebraska football. So that was even taken away from us. So it's just kind of against our human nature that this hushed silence and not be able to relate and really have not much to talk about. Not so with the apostles in today's gospel. Leading up to today's gospel, which is Matthew's gospel, right before this, in my Bible, Jesus was really, really busy. He had just taught the Sermon on the Mount. He taught about the law. He taught about anger. He taught about adultery. He taught about divorce. He taught about oaths. He taught about retaliation, almsgiving, prayer, God and money, fasting, how to pray, how to be a disciple. He taught us not to judge others. After all this teaching, which he was doing in private to his apostles, then he started doing. He healed the paralytic. He drove out demons. He walked on water. He rose several from the dead, and he rose those near death. So he's very, very busy. So he says to his apostles today, you've witnessed all that. I've been teaching you in private. Not because he was his own version of social media and he was craving for attention. Not for them simply to be awed by him. But he did want to be the topic of conversation. So now he tells them today, what I told you in private, what I said to you in darkness, which he means private, what you heard in whispers, again, which means what I told you in private, you have to proclaim from the rooftops. It is destined to be shared, he's telling his apostles, his disciples. I don't do it for my own sake. Salvation and redemption requires it. And you must, from the rooftops, proclaim what you've heard from me and what you have witnessed in my life. So, of course, they also witnessed other things, his persecution and how Jesus was treated. So in that message was, oh, by the way, you will be persecuted. You may even be martyred. But this gospel, as in every other gospel, Jesus always gives us a promise. There's always the good news. And the good news here and the promise is, fear no one. As long as you faithfully carry out my mission, you have nothing to fear. Now, he says here 3 times in the gospel, be not afraid. So he knew them. He knew they were fearful. But he's saying, if I am aware of 2 birds, if 1 or 2 fall to the ground, maybe the most insignificant of animals, but I know the number of hairs on your head. And if I care for them, how much more I must care for you. So don't be afraid. When we hear that they should fear only the one who can kill the body and the soul, he's not talking about Satan. Jesus is talking about his Father. Only the Father in the Trinity has access to our souls. Satan does not. So he's talking about reverential fear. Even if you're martyred, don't worry about it. Whoever killed your body does not have access to your soul. Only I do, he says. We live in a society, in a culture, where Christians are expected and are asked to be silent and to be invisible. So his message to his people of his day is his message to us. Fear no one. My word is destined to be shared. My life and who I am is destined to be shared. And I only have you to do it. And it's tempting for us to stop proclaiming the gospel, to fearlessly proclaim the gospel. And when I say fearlessly proclaim the gospel, I mean fearlessly proclaim the person of Jesus. It's daunting. We're afraid. But Jesus, again, he entrusts the gospel to his disciples, telling them others are dependent on you sharing this for their salvation. His words to us today. So what are the consequences if we don't? Well, history shows repeatedly that wherever the gospel is not proclaimed, wherever Christ is not known, and wherever Christ is not loved, that humans debase, abuse, and consume one another, physically and spiritually. History shows repeatedly that wherever Christ is not known, wherever the gospel is not proclaimed, wherever he is not loved, this corroding effect of society happens. So Jesus in his church is asking us, calling us, you know me. He didn't give the disciples a Bible, a catechism, a papal letter. They didn't have any of that. They only knew who Jesus was. He said, that's all you have to go by, is me. What you heard from me, what you witnessed, now go. That's what he's telling us. And you might say, I can't do it. I may be mocked. I may be ridiculed. You might even get martyred. I'll be persecuted. I remember many years ago, a man went to Father Spenner, our old pastor, and he said, Father, what if a guy thinks he's being called to be a deacon, but he doesn't want to stand up, he doesn't want to preach? And the guy says, I'm an introvert. I just don't want to do it. Father Spenner tells the guy, well, you go tell that guy, don't even apply to be a deacon, because he's being commissioned to preach. Or you can tell him, just do it. The Holy Spirit will take care of everything. Tell him not to be afraid. Well, here I am 15 years later. I can do it. I can share Jesus publicly. You can do it. So again, if I leave you with anything, I repeat once again. Christ is inviting you to participate in his work of salvation. No one has ever loved you so much. No one has ever trusted you so much, but to give you that gift.